everybody, this is Miss Huval. This video is for English 2. It'll cover chapters 7 through 9 of Night. 7 through 9 of Night are quite short. Between the three chapters, they are only, about 15 pages long, maybe a little more, less than 20 for sure, pages 98 to 115. So if you haven't yet read, pause me, go read, and come back and listen to this discussion. All right. So, as Chapter 7 opens, we've got everyone piled onto a cattle car. It's freezing cold. It's snowing. And the cattle car proceeds from Auschwitz to Buchenwald. All sorts of terrible atrocities happen on that journey. And that journey culminates with an expression of a theme that we haven't talked about yet, but that is a huge theme, and that is emotional death. Now, what we mean by emotional death is when a person undergoes so much torment and strives so mightily to survive in the face of every obstacle that can be imagined. The loss of one's faith, the loss of one's family member, the loss of one's human dignity. At a certain point, some people break and they can't bear it anymore. At that stage of the game, they give up and they're ready to die. So the emotional death followed very quickly by giving up, allowing themselves to be selected, or just refusing to go on, allowing themselves to sink down into the snow and fall asleep. So in chapter 7, the character that we see who most exemplifies this theme of emotional death is Shlomo's friend Meyer Katz. He had been a gardener in Buna. He had been the strongest of men and had survived for quite some time. I want to say 3 years in a concentration camp. But what he endures on that train causes him to undergo this emotional death that we're talking about. So the theme goes to show that there is a limit, that people can be pushed to the limit. And at that limit, they undergo this emotional death, which is followed very closely by your actual death. And that's what happened to Meyer Katz. If you recall, at the very end of the train ride, Elie is strangled. Someone, unprovoked, comes up to him and starts to strangle him and try to kill him. And his father gets Meyer Katz to pull this person off, in essence, saving Elie's life. And Shlomo and Meyer Katz have this conversation. He says, I can't do it anymore. And Shlomo tells him, Elie's father, Shlomo, tells him, you have to persist. You can't give up. You have to persevere. We could be hours, days away from liberation. The war's almost over. And Meyer Katz says he can't do it. And he proves that he can't do it when they arrive at Buchenwald and 12 people who have survived the journey get off the train. And Meyer Katz doesn't get off. He stays. And that is the most, I hate to say the most heartbreaking moment, but one of the most heartbreaking moments of the book. This big, strong man just can't do it anymore. Physically, emotionally can't do it anymore. And how does he get to that? Well, in chapter 7, we've got this theme, the one that we've been following the most, front and center. We have 100 people smushed onto this cattle car, in the pouring down snow, with no food. Literally, all they had to survive on was snow for days on end. And there were days prior to that they hadn't eaten. I think Elie says at one point 6 days they go without food. But that may be more toward the end as Buchenwald is being liberated. So there are a lot of things that happen on that train. In chapter 7, probably the one that stands out in your mind the most is that every morning the dead bodies are thrown out of the train. So these are people you've traveled with, maybe you've been at Buna with. These are people that are perhaps your co-workers, perhaps your family members. And overnight, when they pass away, their bodies are unceremoniously tossed from the train. As Elie indicates, no prayers, not the appropriate ceremonies to honor them or their lives. And they're just tossed out like yesterday's trash into the snow. They'll be buried there, and they'll be found when the snow melts in the spring. And not found by their family members, found by the villagers of these villages in Germany and Poland where they're traveling through. So that's a huge assault on their human dignity. And Elie makes the comment in chapter 7 that they were just glad that there was more room. There was no mourning over these people. There was no shock or sorrow at their loss. It was beyond what they could emotionally do at that stage of the game. So we've got emotional death. We've got these inhumane circumstances. And we have a lot of people succumbing to that and losing their dignity. There is a specific instance on the train where a German worker is throwing bread into the train. That happens, oh gosh, where does that happen? Oh, on page... Throw bread on the train. On page 100. Sorry. It took me a minute to find it. Some German workers throw bread into the train. And they are amused by what ensues. And what ensues is a complete debacle. You've got people fighting, a father and son, other individuals, fighting over these crusts of bread. Their animal instincts have taken over. And to the Germans that they pass by, this is very amusing. Maybe the Germans are thinking to themselves that the propaganda was right. Jews are subhuman. What no one stops to think of, I'm sure, among the German workers who were engaged in this cruel and vicious act, is that any of us put in those circumstances would probably behave the exact same way. So there's a parallel story that Elie Wiesel tells about a woman who does something similar after the war. He witnesses her throwing pennies into a body of water and some beggar children fighting and clawing and hurting each other, going after those pennies. And her comment there is that she enjoys giving to charity. When Elie Wiesel begs her to stop, she says, "Why? I enjoy giving to charity." So it's not only the behavior of the men in that train that's disturbing, it's the behavior of the people throwing the bread into the train that is disturbing. The inmates who are traveling on that cattle car have very good reason to have lost their human dignity. They've been extremely abused. What excuse do these German workers have, right? Yeah. So that one was a terrible story. And you're looking at family bonds being completely broken down. And that connection between faith, family, and human dignity is a very important one. And the connection between faith, family, human dignity, and emotional death is a very important one. And as these things go, as these things are lost, hope dies as well. So we have the example of the boy, when the bread's thrown in, who attacks his father to get the bread that the father has. Ultimately, the son kills the father, and then is killed by two other random people. And Elie, in these 3 chapters, as much as he loves his father, almost fantasizes about what it would be to be free of him. And it begins in the cattle car. Now, he saves his father's life, and one day, he doesn't get up quickly, and they're about to throw his body out as a dead body. And Elie stops him, and he manages to wake his father up. But he has that moment where he thinks and he feels that if his father were gone, he would be free. Free to survive on his own, free to give in to these dreams and this temptation he has to die. All right? And at one point, he makes that comment. He said, he brings up Rabbi Elihu's son, and he says, I failed in the same way that Rabbi Elihu's son has failed. And that's not really true. I don't think we would judge him as harshly as he judges himself. When they arrive at Buchenwald, Elie and his father are separated. There is an air raid, not an air raid, what do they call it? An alert. And in the commotion and in the mad rush to find safety, they're separated. And he falls asleep and doesn't even think about his father until the morning. And I think that's where he says it. You know, I haven't passed Rabbi Elihu's son's test. I'm just as bad as he is. When he goes to find his father, it takes him hours to find his father, and his father's in a bad way. When they got to Buchenwald, you had a sense that death had already claimed him, and it was just a formality. Elie even says that. He says in arguing with his father, he was arguing with death itself. His dad wanted to lay down in the snow and end it all, as a lot of other people were doing as they arrived in Buchenwald. And Elie gets furious, and he says, we haven't come all this way to give up. If we die, we die. But we're not going to die because we give up. And his dad continues on out of love for him. So he finds his father, and his dad is burning up with fever, maybe even sort of in some kind of delirium, because he doesn't even recognize Elie. But Elie manages to get him into a barracks where there are sick people. Supposedly, they're going to be cared for, but as we know, that doesn't happen. 2 different doctors see him, and Elie makes the comment that the doctors are there to finish him off, not to help them to recover. They don't bring food to that area because they don't want to waste it on people who are going to die anyway. So he's moved out of that area, but he's suffering from dysentery. And dysentery is a disease caused by poor sanitation of the digestive tract. So he becomes so weak, Shlomo does, that he's unable to drag himself out of the barracks to use the bathroom. And that makes the people who are standing around him extremely agitated. They beat him, they steal what rations he's got. He undergoes extreme suffering at the hands of his fellow inmates, to the point where at one point the Blockel test tells Elie, look, you need to not be giving your father your rations. You need to be taking his rations, because he's dying, and the quicker he dies, I guess it's going to be a mercy. Elie can't bring himself to do it. He loves his father, and he's a loyal son, even though he doesn't view himself that way. And in the end, Elie falls asleep, and his father dies, calling out his name, most likely. And Elie didn't answer. When he wakes up, his father's gone, and another person is in his father's place. So Elie views himself as a complete failure as a son. And the consequence of that is that he pretty much gives up his will to live. At the beginning of chapter 9, he even says, I'm not going to tell you anything about the months in between the end of January and the beginning of April when he's liberated, because my father was gone and nothing mattered to me anymore. So you see each of the people that we've discussed in these chapters, they undergo this emotional death. Meyer Katz can't get off the train. What he witnesses there does him in. What's happened to human nature, the cruelty of the German workers. Seeing 87 people tossed out of that train into the snow. It's too much. Shlomo becomes so ill and so tired that he can't go on. He undergoes the emotional death. And Elie, upon the death of his father, the guilt is too much. And not that he could have done anything, not that he could have changed it, not that he's a superhuman person who in his weakened state could stay up all night if he wanted to. If he had known that was the night that his dad would pass away. So it's just a tragic, tragic end to Elie's dad. They made it so far, but he couldn't hang on until the bitter end. Now, this last part might have confused you a little bit. I find it to be, a little confusing in those last couple of pages. So there are many times, several times, that everyone's called up to be counted. It's a little chaotic. I think there are a smaller number of SS who are in charge of the camp, and it's not being run like a typical well-run concentration camp, because it's the end. They know that it's imminent that the Americans are going to arrive. And so there are several times where they're all called up. People have been passing as non-Jews. It's chaos. And Elie's been stuck with the children since the death of his father. And so he's somewhat in a different group than he's been in the entire time he's been there. So he gets a tip one time not to go to the lineup, that they're planning to kill everyone. So he doesn't go. And there is a resistance group who is planning to, do their best to overtake the SS guards so that the final solution can't be carried out. So the liquidation starts. People are marched out. They never come back. We're assuming that they're marched out of the concentration camp and that they're shot. That's what we have to assume. But what happens is that before Elie and his group are marched out, he says there are about 10,000 people left in that camp. Before his group is marched out, the uprising occurs. The resistance overtakes the camp. The SS flee, and they're free. It's over. They all fall on the provisions. They try to eat. This happens about noon. It starts at 10 in the morning, happens about noon. At 6 o'clock that evening, the American tanks roll in, and it's official. It's over. Now, Elie makes the comment that they never thought of revenge, and that ties back to what we've been talking about, being so broken down by the loss of the faith, the loss of the family bonds, the emotional death, that you're not thinking as you would. You just don't care anymore. All you can think of is the bread, and we've watched that little progression over the novel. He's a man. He's a stomach. And that's all he is. He's a stomach in search of bread. That's what his humanity has been boiled down to. And he talks about that in this chapter. And then he gets sick. He must have eaten something that's bad, and he's poisoned. Just some kind of food poison. He's sick for 2 weeks. And the very last lines of the book are that when he recovers enough to get up, he looks in the mirror. He looks at himself for the first time in the mirror since the ghetto. And he sees a corpse staring back at him in the eyes. Okay? So this emotional death for him is complete. And he says the look in his eyes when he looked at himself that day in the mirror for the first time since the ghetto has never left him. And you remember that he wrote the book 10 years after he was liberated. And so that image of himself, that deadness, that emotional death and the resulting blank emptiness that he saw in his eyes remained with him for a very, very long time. And so, in the end, this book is so sad, and it is such a tribute to the human spirit as well. Even though he got out barely alive and emotionally dead, he was able to rebuild his life, become a very important part of his society, and marry and have a family. So I hope you enjoyed the book. It's one of my all-time favorites. It's a look inside a concentration camp like very few other books can provide. I wanted to tell you one other thing before I sign off. Your challenge for the end of the book is to go to YouTube and type in Oprah and Elie Wiesel and Auschwitz. Now, you'll pop up with a 45-minute video. I know you know who Oprah Winfrey is. She chose night as one of her book club choices. She met Elie Wiesel. They struck up a wonderful friendship, and they traveled together to Auschwitz in the wintertime. And she interviews him as they tour around Auschwitz. It is not to be missed. It is a fabulous interview. Anyway, so that's your challenge for the end of the book. I want you to go to YouTube, type this in. There's one, you know how sometimes they divide them up into sections? There's one that's not divided. It's 45 minutes in total. And this is the guy who uploaded it. This is the name of the guy who uploaded the 45-minute version. So I want you to look this up, watch it. It's 45 minutes. And my next video will be a discussion of that. Hope you're doing well. I sure do miss you. Thanks for watching.